Now, it's my pleasure to introduce Welton Jones, our guest speaker for today. Come on up, Welton. As many of you know, Welton was a longtime writer, editor, and critic for the San Diego Union and Union Tribune. And he's going to tell you a little bit more about that, but I just wanted to mention that he's also been a longtime member of the Committee of 100's Board of Directors. He is as close as you can get to being our institutional memory. Maybe Joy Ledford beats him by a little bit, but that's about it. So welcome, Welton, and it's all yours.
I only know one eyewitness who actually visited Zoro Gardens during the 1935 California Pacific International Exposition. And he says, yes, they really were naked. A crust of misinformation has built up around the Exposition's nudist colony over the decades. And the lack of contemporary records doesn't help much in finding the truth. It almost seems like San Diego still can't believe what happened. But it's true. Let's see. For 25 cents, you could walk into a sylvan glade with waterfalls, fragrant plants, and a grandstand where you could sit for hours and watch beautiful young people, mostly female, go about their business in the nude. Okay, the handful of men usually wore trunks or loincloths. And the girls usually had on what were called ghost panties. The sort of thing known in the burlesque business as G-strings. They usually were apparent when cameras were around. The garden had a great location. Right next to the main gate on Park Boulevard, where the crowds left the trolley and entered the park. The setting, with its vaguely Mayan dressing rooms overlooking a central fire pit in a clearing, was designed for the show by architects working for Richard Requa. His name is all over the plans. The correct spelling, despite what you may see on the souvenir pictures, was Z-O-R-O. More on that later. The structure is mostly still intact today, now designated as a butterfly garden. According to the Expo's official printed daily programs, the gardens opened at 11 a.m. and closed at midnight, every day that the exposition was open. And that 25 cents let you in for as long as you cared to linger. But it was the Depression, and some people couldn't spare the 25 cents. Understanding the publicity possibilities, the Expo management didn't work too hard at maintaining the rough wooden fences around the gardens. So there was an alternative. You couldn't see much, but you could see something. During 1935, the daily program even listed proudly, under free attractions, the chance to peep through the knotholes. Still, well over 500,000 people paid to get in during the months in 35 and 36 when the Expo was open. So now you know more than most people about the reality of Zoro Gardens. But history is a harsh mistress. She thrives on accuracy and completeness. I'm not a professional historian, just a retired newspaper writer, but here is my best attempt at filling in some of the holes in the Zoro Gardens story. To begin with, the place had nothing to do with the sword-fighting fellow in the black mask. This Zoro was borrowed from Zoroaster, the pre-Islam Persian mystic of the 6th or 7th century BC. Is he up there? I'm looking sideways. The name was picked by Dr. Alois Knapp, a pioneering American nudist who opened his Zoro Nature Park in Roseland, Indiana in 1933. He and his followers held lengthy discussions with the management of Chicago's Century of Progress about a nudist feature which finally opened in the last weeks of that expo indoors. It was a mystical 20-minute spectacle called Sacrifice to the Sun God, narrated by Knapp himself, wearing the mini toga there on the left. Its featured player, though, was 22-year-old Yvonne Stacy, one of Knapp's main disciples and a truly beautiful woman. That's her kneeling nearest him. After the Century of Progress closed, Chicago promoters Stanley R. Graham and Nate T. Eagle, who already had a deal to bring their midget village to San Diego, began negotiating with the nudists also. Stacy and her husband partner, F. Merrill Smith, took over the show when Knapp was accused by fellow nudists of selling out. As the jazz age faded and the Depression took hold, interest in nudism had bloomed. There were press stories, jokes, cartoons, books, and inevitably some documentary films solemn enough to dodge some of the censors. Apparently, the Expo management in San Diego decided to ride this wave and take a chance. Stacy would head the colony as Queen Zorine, a salute to Knapp, and Smith would be the narrator and the solid male presence as Dr. Frederick S. Merrill. They demanded a cast of genuine nudists, preferably from their Chicago group. Graham and Eagle agreed, but pointed out there were nudists in California, too. Eventually, a company of 50 nature lovers was assembled. That first year, there were at least 3 men, including a 70-year-old Californian named Adolf, a self-styled nature man with the hair to prove it. Queen Zorine made it very clear that their actual relationship was only during working hours. On the night before the expo opened, there was what the press labeled an undress rehearsal for District Attorney Thomas Whalen. His verdict, no worse than you'd see at a burlesque show. Zorine, who did a great job in dodging at the preview and dodging through the shadows, said, quote, "I will respect your laws. I do not cherish going to your jails, but I will not wear a burlesque costume." It was Yvonne Stacy's beauty, carriage, dignity, and conviction, more than anything else, that made Zoro Garden's work. She defied the snickering press and the panting public who wanted to consider hers a mere girly show. And if she did not feel that nudism was a lofty creed worth fighting for, she certainly gave that impression. She made the show legitimate by the sheer force of her personality and beauty. By September, Eileen Jackson was reporting in the San Diego Union that Frank Belcher, president of the Expo, and his wife were naming their new thoroughbred racehorse Queen Zorine. When the Expo opened on the 29th of May, audiences found Zoro Gardens to be a lush 6 acres of tropical escapism. The nudists in their ghost panties read, exercised, gossiped, played at archery and volleyball, a crowd favorite, lounged on tanned cowhide rugs, and 5 times a day did their 20-minute sacrifice to the sun god. An entertainment featuring Queen Zorine and her handmaidens parading about in veils and then not. There was talk of a death dance, but and other features, but no script survives. The company also prepared and ate meals in a modern electric kitchen, undoubtedly provided by a sponsor, in one of those upstage Mayan temples. Here's Zorine moving to take her turn as cook. The late Ellen Eckes was only one of many who joked about the perils of frying bacon in the nude. The biggest problem with the meal thing was that so many of the nudists were vegetarians and really didn't need to cook. At least that's what the publicity said. And in pondering the history of Zoro Gardens, it's important to remember always that the news was controlled by the press agents. Only Zorine herself was really successful in slipping past them. Meanwhile, she was a tireless trooper at keeping the ballyhoo going. Perhaps the single most iconic image to come out of the entire exposition shows the meeting of Zorine with Alpha the robot, another expo featured attraction. When the famous female evangelist Amy Semple McPherson was scheduled to play the organ pavilion, Queen Zorine invited her to tea. She didn't say no right away, and the press got all worked up. Eventually, Amy stood up the Queen, and Zorine's sad dignity act made it seem a social gaffe by the evangelist. Other promotions were more successful, such as the famous Three Queens tea. The blonde on the left was Sonia Ruggie, San Francisco's Queen of the Fair. On the right is Mrs. H.K. Remington, who, using her stage name of Elizabeth Soursby, played Queen Elizabeth I at the Old Globe Theater. And in the middle, of course, is the hostess, who probably had intended to make better use of that tree. The airbrush artist had to be called in. The closest that Zoro Gardens came to making real news probably was when the expo management received an angry letter from nudist camps in Upland, SoCal, and San Francisco, rejecting Zoro Gardens as frauds and commercial exhibitionists. Zorine fired out back, "It burns me up," pointing out that at least one of the complainers wasn't even registered with the International Nudist Conference. And then, "We'll debate them anytime," said Zorine. King Adolf dismissed them all as Sunday nudists, who, quote, "go around all dressed up during the week with underwear, collars, and everything." And Zorine had to laugh at the letter's suggestion the expo check with Marion Nichols at Campo Nudisto in Hamul. Said Zorine, "He's one of our very good friends." But all wasn't well between Zorine and the management. They kept hiring new people she didn't consider real nudists. And there were problems with the increasing flow of picture postcards. The nudists weren't getting royalties. And there was public pressures, too. Zorine announced on September the 10th that there would be a Miss Nudist America contest in October, and that beauty alone is not sufficient. The next day in the paper, Police Chief Sears said that there would be no such contest.